Uh, Good evening. It is good evening. Good evening. It is 6:16 p.m. on June 26th, and I am calling to order uh, the Rent Guidelines Board hearing for the City of Kingston, New York. Um, we'll start with a roll call. Noah Kipliogman, I am present. Diana Lopez Martinez is not here yet. Mia Unuye is on Zoom, uh, or it may be on Zoom, but will not be participating. Anthony Jr. Tampone.
Here.
Tara Perry.
Here.
Michael Tierney.
Here.
Carol Soto.
Here.
Carol Soto participating by Zoom. Arlene Puentes. Lee Dodson.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to begin this evening with a little bit of a summary of this board's statutory responsibilities and to outline the steps that this board has taken to ensure diligent compliance with relevant law and court orders. I will then invite the owner representatives to present a proposal for a guideline for rent adjustments to 1- and 2-year leases commencing between October 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2025 for units under this board's jurisdiction. After the owner representatives make a presentation, we will hear from tenant representatives. At that point, I will entertain motions for discussion. This board's sole purview is to set annual guidelines for the adjustment of rents in units covered by the Emergency Tenant Protection Act as amended in the City of Kingston. The Emergency Tenant Protection Act, Section 4, Paragraph B, requires that this Rent Guidelines Board establish annual guidelines for rent adjustments for 1- and 2-year leases commencing between October 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2025 for units under this board's jurisdiction. As required by the statute and by longstanding practice, the board has considered, among other things, 1, the economic condition of the residential real estate industry, 2, relevant data from the current and projected cost of living indices, and 3, such other data as may be available to it. We have been presented with statistical information from our colleagues at DHCR, conducted public hearings at which many members of the public testified, including elected officials and representatives of local organizations. We have received written comments by email from several more. We've heard from landlords and from tenants and from people who are neither. We've been presented with a variety of approaches to understanding and evaluating the available evidence. In doing so, we have fulfilled our statutory responsibility. One source of confusion and complication about our statutory responsibility is the lawsuit brought against this board, DHCR, and the City of Kingston by the Hudson Valley Property Owners Association et al. The plaintiffs in that litigation have made their voices and their opinions clear, both in their suit and in their attendance at public hearings this month. The current state of that litigation is that the appellate court for New York's Third Department has upheld both the city's decision to declare an emergency pursuant to the ETPA as amended, and this board's guidelines for the 2022 to 2023 year and for fair market rent appeals. While the HVPOA et al. Have requested permission to appeal the Third Department's unanimous decision to the Court of Appeals, the highest court in our state, it seems unlikely that they will be successful. If they are denied permission, the decision stands. In any case, the ETPA and the 2022 to 2023 rent adjustments are now in full force and effect until and unless the Court of Appeals declares otherwise. We have heard from both tenants and owners over the past few weeks testimony that the guidelines that this board set for the 2022 to 2023 year are not reflected in the rents that are being charged and paid. We have also heard from DHCR staff that the agency has only now begun to process complaints brought about noncompliance with the guideline that was upheld by the appellate court this spring. I'm going to turn to the data that this board is required to review. I'd like to highlight a number of pieces of relevant information, including some that we discussed last week. Combined tax rates in Kingston, per the 2024 report from Ulster County, increased slightly for 2023, but are still below their 2022 rates. Water and sewer rates in Kingston increased roughly 5% from 2023. Data from the Ulster County's 2022 Rental Housing Survey, which is still the most recent available online, show that between 2020 and 2022, average rents for studio apartments increased 7.6%, one-bedroom apartment rents decreased 4.2%, two-bedroom rates increased 5.7%, and three-bedroom units increased 18.4%. Median rents were more stable with the exception of a 10.4% increase in three-bedroom rents. The vacancy rate, calculated from a small sample because of non-responsiveness of building owners, was 1.05%. The advertised rent of available units in Ulster County increased by dramatic rates between 2020 and 2022, north of 30% for one-bedroom units and 45% for two-bedroom units. The county report also highlights that more than half of renter households in Ulster County are cost-burdened, paying more than 30% of their income in rent. 28% of renter households in our county are severely cost-burdened, which means that they pay more than half of their income in rent. This showcases a rental market that continues to be in crisis, matching the testimony that this board has heard from the public. Pattern for Progress's annual Out of Reach report, which I shared with this board, has been particularly useful for this board in the past. I want to highlight a brief quotation from the executive summary for the 2023 report. This year's report continues to underscore an irrefutable truth. Even with long work hours or multiple jobs, most renters in our region struggle to pay for rent and modest living costs. Over the past 5 years, rents across our region have increased by anywhere between 25 to 45%. With inflation hitting a 40-year peak in 2022, the basic costs of living, food, transportation, healthcare, and more, are also out of reach, end quote. In Ulster County specifically, the Pattern for Progress report shows that rents increased at twice the rate of wages in the last year. The law requires that this board consider cost of living indices, and to that end, DHCR research staff provided this board with the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics' monthly report on the Consumer Price Index published May 15th, 2024. I want to draw our attention to key passages from that report. The indices for gasoline and shelter, and I'm quoting from the second paragraph of the news release shared by DHCR, contributed over 70% of the monthly increase in the index for all items. And on page 4, the shelter index increased 5.5% over the last year, accounting for over 2/3 of the total 12-month increase in the all items less food and energy index. So the headline 3.4% annual increase in consumer prices is driven in large part by increases in the cost of shelter. Were one to exclude rent and owner's equivalent of rent from the CPI calculation, inflation over the last year would in fact be at a very moderate 1.4%, right? Straight from the CPI report that DHCR shared with us. For the first time, this board was presented with data collected from owners of the specific buildings subject to the adjustment that this board will decide. I want to reiterate a couple of clear things that we heard last week. In aggregate, owners' income for responding buildings increased in 2022 and again in 2023. Operating expenses for the responding buildings increased by a modest 3.1% in 2022 and then decreased by 0.3% in 2023. Those year-over-year changes meant that the portion of owners' income spent on operating expenses has decreased over the past 3 years from 57.87% in 2021 to 55.55% in 2022 to 53.18% in 2023. This shows that the regulated buildings in Kingston have meaningfully better operating margins than the regulated buildings in other areas subject to regulation under ETPA. Westchester buildings have a cost-to-income ratio of 64.46% in 2023. Nassau County buildings have a cost-to-income ratio of 63.6% in 2023. Rockland County buildings also have a cost-to-income ratio of 63.6%. In short, Kingston owners have 10% more of their building revenue available for investing, debt service, and profit than do owners of regulated buildings in those 3 counties. In fact, the Kingston cost-to-income ratios are also better than any subset of regulated buildings in New York City, according to data from the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. We got data this morning or maybe yesterday disaggregating larger and smaller buildings in the sample. And I do want to remember that that disaggregation has limited statistical validity, right? We were warned to be very, very careful about using that data because it rapidly diminishes in reliability the more we tease it apart. But even that data show similar trends. Net operating income has increased year over year in both large and smaller buildings, while large buildings, as can be expected because of operating efficiencies, show larger operating margins. Even the smaller Kingston buildings show better cost-to-income ratios than the combined large and small buildings in the suburban counties. Turning to enforcement, which this board has been appropriately curious about, this board has been curious about how well owners of buildings subject to regulation have been complying with their legal responsibilities that include offering 1- and 2-year leases, that include a standard rider outlining owner and tenant rights and responsibilities under ETPA regulation, that include maintaining existing services for the building and for each unit, and for adjusting the rent charged at lease renewal by no more than the guidelines set by this board. This board provided DHCR with a written list of specific questions about enforcement, and DHCR has not yet delivered written answers to that, but promises that they're coming. I look forward to more complete reporting. The testimony that this board did hear does not inspire confidence in landlord compliance with the law. We heard, I want the record to note that Mie Nuye has joined us. Thank you, Mie, I appreciate it. We heard from tenants that they have not been offered leases that include the required rider. We heard no evidence of any lease renewal being offered reflecting the 2022 to 2023 guideline that has now been upheld by the appellate court. We heard particularly worrisome testimony from some owners that they are well aware of the regulation, that they have been provided with ample documentation of their legal responsibilities, and yet they have still chosen not to comply with the law. In short, the June 20th headline from the Kingston Wire rings true. This is, quote, massive non-compliance. This board heard from DHCR last week. I'm doing my best. This board heard from DHCR last week that 56 of the 64 buildings provisionally subject to regulation have failed to comply with the annual registration requirement, despite multiple reminders from DHCR. I am profoundly disappointed to note that the same building owners that have failed to complete the legally required registrations apparently all participated voluntarily in a survey of rental rates administered by the HVPOA and distributed to this board by that organization at a public meeting. This simultaneous non-compliance with lawful reporting requirements, while apparently providing the same or similar information to a private actor, suggests a level of organized lawlessness and bad faith participation in these public hearings that does not match the claims we have heard from owners of being generous and engaged community members. This behavior should be unacceptable in our community, and I encourage Kingston landlords, the HVPOA that claims to represent them, and leaders in our community to hold these community members to higher standards of decency and lawfulness. I want to reiterate suggestions that I've made in the past and have made to many owners over the phone who I've had the pleasure of talking with. You must take your responsibilities under the law seriously. You must learn what the law requires. You must ask DHCR for help when you find it confusing, and you must follow the law. It is not optional. Participate in the process of rent regulation in good faith. Responding promptly and accurately to the annual DHCR surveys, even when they're not required by law, helps the board do its job. As DHCR Assistant Commissioner Guy Alba said last week, this board can't know what your income and expenses are unless you complete those income and expense surveys. I hope that when this board reconvenes next year, we see data that shows that Kingston owners are uniformly in compliance with the law and participating in the lawful process of rent regulation in good faith by responding to the data collection surveys that this board needs to be effective. I expect nothing less from the group of owners that, to hear the testimony prepared for this board, are committed and public-spirited community members. We have also heard conflicting reports from DHCR, from tenants and tenant organizers about what complaints have been filed and what resolutions have or have not happened. DHCR leaders have explained the constraints of administering law and regulation while lawsuits are pending, and have expressed a commitment to delivering more active implementation and administration of ETPA now that the city's emergency declaration and this board's adjustment have been upheld in appellate court. I look forward to hearing from tenants and DHCR staff next year that the agency has been present in Kingston, has been effective and timely in its administrative processes to ensure that the law is followed, and that complaints are investigated and resolved in a reliable and timely way. At this point, I would love to turn to our owner representatives on the board to make a proposal and present a point of view.
I think that we can all agree that a lot of tenants in the city of Kingston are struggling to pay rent. I don't think there's anyone in this room that disagrees with that. I think the problem we as a board have to understand, as unpopular as it is that a lot of landlords in Kingston, especially the smaller ones, are struggling too, just like the tenants are. Not all landlords have increased their rents over the years like others have. For anyone who doesn't know my background, I've been managing apartment complexes right here in Kingston for over 25 years. So I understand both the tenants and the landlord's perspective of things. For the last 16 years, I've been managing a low-income housing complex right here in Kingston. So I do have some firsthand knowledge of how important affordable housing is to this community. I provide people who are struggling and in need with safe, affordable housing, and I do love my job. Part of my job is to prepare the budgets each year for the property, so I personally see how much things actually cost. I can tell you it isn't cheap and it isn't easy to run a building. It's honestly a thankless job most of the time. Landlords depend on the rent money to run and maintain their buildings. And if they're lucky, they may have a few dollars left over that they can reinvest back into their buildings at the end of the day. What I think people lose sight of sometimes is that landlords rely on rent to cover the costs of running and maintaining their buildings. The expenses of running a property has significantly increased in recent years, including contractor fees, material costs, utilities, interest rates, taxes, insurance. Landlords are responsible for ensuring that everything is in working order for their tenants. While some landlords struggle to address maintenance issues promptly due to financial constraints, I'm afraid a 0% increase could result in further cutbacks in maintenance and amenities or even lead to neglected repairs. There needs to be a balance so that landlords can provide for their tenants, while tenants aren't faced with unaffordable rents or substandard living conditions due to landlords' financial difficulties. Considering there was a rent reduction of 15% for the first year and a 0% increase for the second year, I feel it would be irresponsible to keep the increase at 0% again, taking into account how much costs are rising to maintain a property. I propose a modest 5% increase for the upcoming year and 5% for the next year, which I believe is necessary to ensure the proper maintenance and running of properties.
Thank you, Tara. Junior, do you have something to add?
We are all here because we want our city to have strong, stable, and affordable housing. I don't think anybody here can disagree with that in any way. I personally advocated for the enactment of the ETPA here in the city of Kingston. I think it's a necessary tool in a challenging time of transition for this city, and it helps to stabilize people's transition in life during a really difficult time. And I think that's the intention of the legislation. We've heard testimony from a number of different individuals expressing some very varied perspectives, and have finally at least seen some data from DHCR this time around. Certainly, I certainly wish that we had better information. I know that I've been beating that drum since day one here, and even the information that we have from DHCR is just not nearly sufficient. What I see when I review the testimony that we've received over the last 2 weeks, it's a similar to story to what we've heard since this process began. A pretty clear story of predatory or neglectful practices that have been focused on being sourced from a small number of properties. And I find that these tactics are absolutely appalling, and no one should have to deal with that. I know that that has been happening since before ETPA. It seems to continue to happen. And I certainly want to remind the public that this is a complaint-driven process. So if you are being treated that way or given presented with leases that are not in line with what should be happening, you need to file a complaint with DHCR. Every single one of those people has such a right to be upset. Noticeably absent from the testimony of these appalling deeds, though, is the vast majority of the properties that are under the jurisdiction of this board. We certainly hear those stories, but we don't hear those stories from, honestly, most of the tenants that are here that we have jurisdiction over. We have, though, heard testimony and received some data from a few property owners of smaller buildings. That information paints a very different picture of what's actually happening here in the city of Kingston. Here we see a collection of mostly local people who seem to care at least a little bit about the local community. Hopefully, some of them seem to care quite a bit. We see a collection of local people who look at their building as a small business, right? Kind of a labor of love. We're not seeing people who are like real estate investment trusts and large investors. These people, they have a lot invested in these buildings. Much of that sweat equity, right? Things that are people who know their tenants and their tenants know them, right? And that's just a very different perspective. This is not simply an asset that they want to make look good on paper so that they can leverage. For them, there's a lot more to lose, right? And the small building owner, the complexities of working in this environment is challenging. I did a experiment last week where I called DHCR and I told them that I was buying a building in the city of Kingston, and I asked them what to do, and the amount of nonsense that I got was absolutely ridiculous. So try doing that. If you put yourself in the position of being a building owner, it's very unclear. There is a theme in the narrative that we keep on hearing over and over in the testimony that we heard. And this narrative is basically that landlords are doing fine and they're greedy and tenants are struggling. And while that narrative is certainly true for some individuals, let's please be careful when we make broad assumptions about groups of individuals. I don't think there's ever been a time in human history where gross negative assumptions were made about a group and it worked out good for humanity. We should all be wary about assuming another person's station in life. I've heard a number of times statements from the people making testimony and members of this board that landlords are not in any threat of being homeless or losing their housing. I need to tell you from a small business perspective, that's not really true, because most commercial loans from small operators require personal guarantees. And if that building goes under, they can lose their house. They can lose whatever it is that they have, right? It's a different way of looking at investing in these properties. It's just like if you had any other small business. Um, so, we need to think about that. And let's look at the situation that happens if one of these owners does need to sell, right? They want to get out of this property. They're under these regulations, like the property doesn't necessarily look good on paper. So who's going to buy that, right? A typical local investor is not going to buy that because it's going to take a lot of cash and they're going to have to sit on that asset for a long time. So who's going to buy that asset? Real estate investment trusts will buy that asset. BlackRock's will buy that asset. Like those types of organizations are going to buy that asset. And what does that do to our local community, right? How does that help us here in the city of Kingston when whatever rent anyone ends up paying to that is just going to be pumped out of our community? Our local owners, they live here. They spend their money here. That money is recycled in our local economy. It is not pumped out of our local economy. When we're thinking about stability of all the people in the city of Kingston, which I know is not necessarily the view, like what this board needs to be looking at, but I think it's something that we should keep in mind. We need to make sure that we're helping our local economy. That exact concept, really what Noah was just saying about the reports for the pattern for progress report, that all of those challenges are happening also for these local business owners, and those pressures are there and they are very real. With that in mind, I think that we need to look at these buildings from two different perspectives. We need to look at large buildings and small buildings. I propose that we consider two sets of guidelines. We do have the option of setting guidelines based on jurisdictions or zones as determined by the board according to the enabling legislation. So I certainly think that we should look at that. I think that we could do that easily using our zoning code. I've been advised that maybe we can't do that based on a number of units, but doing it based on zoning code, I would propose that we have a different guideline for buildings within special districts and a different guideline for buildings that are within a transect zone within the city of Kingston. And that pretty well aligns with the separation of large properties and medium to small properties. Before I actually give a quick the guideline that I actually want to propose, I do have a little bit of a concern that I want to say about about the information that's shared here, and especially some misinformation. And there's been statements made by organizations, other individuals, and even members of this board that are misleading or simply incorrect, especially regarding the 22-23 guidelines set by this board. I don't think that that's done maliciously, but it's really important that even if we might have a misunderstanding, that especially in this time of history, that we don't state our thoughts or opinions as statements of fact. We need to reference like what the law is, and if we're not really sure about it, then we can ask DHCR, we can ask an attorney, and like especially about the way this 15% negative guideline that we set is. It's important that people know that the only people who might get that guideline adjustment is people whose rents renew between October 1st of 2023 and I guess it's with September 23rd, in September of 23, 22 and 23, I'm sorry. I mean, just the statement about like people not, property owners not registering this year, right? My understanding, and I could be wrong about this, is that they have until July 31st in order to register, right? So someone is not in compliance when they still have another month to register. So statements that say otherwise are just misleading at best. DHCR just on the 18th of this month published information regarding the 22-23 guideline, right? Before that, property owners at the least did not know what to do. So this narrative that there is like this malicious avoidance, I think is just not helpful. Put yourself in the point of view of a property owner. You give somebody a discount, the thing gets thrown out, then you're looking for that individual to pay back that money, and maybe they don't have it, right? It just creates a complication that it's not helpful for anyone, right? As of right before I came here, fact sheet 26 still does not include the 22-23 guideline, and that's where DHCR is supposed to publish it, right? It's not there. So, if you're a property owner, there is, it's not easy. All of this is basically clear as mud. So please think about that when we're making statements of character about people. As far as my guideline, I propose that we have two different guidelines. Guidelines for properties that exist in special districts. I propose a 0% change for both 1 and 2 year leases. The City of Kingston zoning code separates the city into a number of different districts and transects. So if we separate special districts, which considers right now has all of the large buildings in it. It's called special district. That is the zone is special district. In the City of Kingston zoning code. Yes, those are all the large buildings. Yeah, and by large buildings, it is, so like what's in there is like Stony Run and Fairview Gardens and Chestnut Mansion, and Dutch Village, like all the large buildings.
And so this district is not a geographic district, it's a district of
each one of those properties.
Of a building that has a certain number of.
No, a special district in our zoning code defines a number of different uses, but all of these properties are in special districts. And then there's also transects, which are more like things that are, those properties you can see are specifically built, right? They are a large property that is built specifically to be a complex like that, right? The other buildings are integrated within our neighborhoods and communities, right? So like those buildings fall within transects. Transects, it's a replacement for zones. We used to have zones. Now our new land use planning law is separated, which is special district and transects. Yeah, transect with CT. Yeah. So for those buildings within special districts, I propose 0% guideline for this upcoming year. For those buildings within transect, I propose a 4% positive adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases.
Thank you, Junior.
Thanks.
If you've got a question for Junior or Tara, that seems fine to do now.
We need a second for that? Was that a motion?
I would prefer not to do motions until we hear from the tenant representatives. So yeah,
Just a clarifying question. How would you define a small building?
Well, I would love to have more information to really separate that out better. Right now, the easiest way that I could find to do that was by using the city's planning code in order to do that. I don't even know how DHCR, like they didn't even tell us what number of units they split this up on, so I really, really don't know. But I mean, typically I would say 10 units or less is like roughly what I'm feeling. Although in absence of better information to really know where to draw that line, I think that my proposal is the easiest way to do that. I'm sure in future years with more information, we could do a better job. I just don't think that we have what we need to do that at this point in time.
Thank you. Just one other question. So a concern of mine would be defining a small building by the building itself
Mhm.
rather than by the business.
Mhm.
My concern would be that there are people who may own multiple small buildings. That's not a small business. I'm thinking of Kathy Dinnis, the landlord who came and testified at our hearing on June 15th. She said that she owned a total of 6 buildings, plus one in Florida, and considered herself a mom and pop landlord. She sold all but 2 buildings, an 8-unit and a 6-unit. So if all 6 of Kathy's buildings were under 10 units, is she still a small landlord?
Yeah, I would totally consider that a small landlord.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That's a concern of mine. Interesting.
Um, yeah, I mean, if you look at the, you know, I'm a similarly sized property owner, and I'll tell you right now that if I had to take 15% off of the income that I had in those buildings, I would lose my house. I guarantee you that, and you can look at my books if you want to.
I
Having
appreciate
trouble understanding what you're saying? It's the,
the
Yeah,
echo.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The different, it is without looking at someone's books, it's really, really hard to say whether or not someone is doing well or not. And one of the things that we need to do on this board, unfortunately, is make certain amounts of assumptions, um, and uh, and and um, an assumption that. Uh, the assumption that all landlords are doing fine, I think, is wholly insufficient. Um, uh, there is certainly some landlords that are doing fine. There are certainly some tenants that are doing fine. We have some tenants that also own vacation homes, and are also like paying ridiculously low rents and make well into the 6-figure salaries, right? But it's all in the same group, right? We can't, we are, we're trying to do, we can't do surgery here. And, 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 and we need to try to make the best assumptions that we can. And based on the limited information that we have, based on my perspective and experience, um, it is this is the best and most fair way that I can think of separating out these units. Um, yeah.
Is there any data like behind your guideline? I mean, so you've told us that you think that we have no right to make assumptions about people's books, right? About how they're doing financially, but then it seems like you're kind of contradicting yourself because you're now telling us that uh, we have to make assumptions in order to make a decision. I mean, aren't we supposed to be making our decision based on the data that that landlords submit about their expenses? And if so, how is your guideline, how does it reflect that data?
Well, I mean, from a comparison of what we do have, which I'll admit is not great, you know, we definitely see that there's a significant difference in how smaller buildings, and again, I don't know what smaller buildings is defined as, you know, in this information, but how they fared in the last, 3 years compared to larger buildings. Also, I mean, actually put this together last year, but like the rate of rate of changing taxes for smaller buildings has been significantly different than larger buildings. I didn't put that list together this year. But the rate of change of property taxes on smaller buildings has historically been much higher. Small building owners also, like, they are running into all the same issues that we have that every other individual is running into, higher energy costs, higher insurance, insurance rates that are going almost universally up at least 10% in New York State. New York State requires insurance companies to send notices when that happens, and I've gotten that notice for every single one of my buildings. And actually, I think that was in someone else mentioned that in one of the testimonies that we got listed here. Some of the few landlords that we did hear from as well, they are listing fantastically low rents for being in the city of Kingston. Some as low as $650 a month. And I have no idea what the condition of that unit is. But that's a very, very low rent in here in the city of Kingston. And one of the things that stinks about rent control and rent stabilization is if we make this broad, when there's a regulation that says you can only make so much of a change, right? It doesn't allow a property owner to say, hey, like, I know that you're struggling. I'm going to not change the rent for like a couple of years, right? Because they don't know whether or not when that person eventually moves out that they're going to be able to recover that, right? That's something that happens when the landowner and the tenant. That's my practice. It's been my practice for the 16 years that I've been doing this. And it is for many of the people that I know that work in this industry locally. Not all of them. I mean, I know people who give a rent increase every year too. That happens. But the vast majority of them don't. And we have to give a little bit of space for people that have been doing that, and think about what it really takes to maintain a property, right? The information we have doesn't include anything about capital investments. The cash flow information is absolutely useless. I don't have any idea why they included depreciation in cash flow. It's like it just doesn't make sense. Again, we need to make assumptions, and a lot of this is my own experience, and some with a little bit of data we have, and also knowing that for a number of these units, they may be, I'm talking about a 4% increase from what for many of these units might be a 15% decrease, that is all being calculated just now, as this litigation is settled. So, with all those things in mind, I think, having what for some units might be a net 11% decrease from 2022 is beyond fair.
We will return to this conversation,
Yeah.
but I want to hear from the tenant representatives. Michael, Carol.
I have a question for Junior. This is a pretty big proposal that your special districts, transact, et cetera. How is it that you didn't, put this into some sort of writing and email us that this might be something that you might propose? And, when you're saying that we shouldn't make assumptions, then we shouldn't make assumptions. We shouldn't be saying that people are making six figures and have a lot of vacation homes and all of that sort of things as well. But I just want to put those two things out, and I wonder why, because you are normally very thorough, why you didn't inform us, Junior, that you were going to make a proposal based on zoning districts.
Because having that discussion outside of a public meeting would be a violation of open meeting law, as far as I understand.
But you could email proposals, or you can email things rather than having a meeting with more than 3 people.
No, according
Okay.
to April, you cannot do that.
Okay. Well, so I'll just leave that aside. And if you want, I will make my presentation now, which is very similar to what Noah said. He did quite an interesting recap at the beginning, and he eloquently presented a lot of facts and figures to this meeting. So I'm just going to reiterate, we are being promised that there will be an enforcement of this board's 15% decrease. That is in fact law. So, but we've not yet seen it. The tenants that we represent have not had any real relief, and they are afraid to contest their landlords in any way. The mechanism by which they can make complaints to the DHCR is difficult for many of the people in our population, especially the elder population, others that are computer illiterate. It's pretty much impossible. The reality in wages is wages lag way behind the skyrocketing cost of living. As Noah said originally, the 30% marker for a household considered as rent burdened, well, it is, for extremely burdened is 28%, but it's 47% of the Ulster County renters, according to the American Community Survey of 2017 through 2021. This isn't changed. None of the renters that testified have seen rent reduction or basic repairs. Some renters have been illegally asked to pay an increase. My landlord has refused to send my lease certified return request mail after repeated requests. They're violating the law, the same way the landlord who testified that he hadn't even heard of a 15% decrease that our board has ordered is disregarding the law. Clearly, from the respondents to the survey, as labor costs went up, repairs went down. There was no representation of severe cost increases in the survey. And unfortunately, the survey is what we have to base our information on. And I do agree with Noah that it is some form of organized lawlessness that you just say, no, I'm not going to do this. When we were sued by the landlord, they spared no expense in hiring an expensive Manhattan firm to take up their case. when I see that the expense of lawyers is no obstacle, but necessary repairs and good heat in the winter is not possible in many units of Kingston, I have trouble with this. We were lucky to have excellent representation of the Mid-Hudson Legal Services and Marcy Kovic, for which I am very thankful. It's important that we respect the needs of the landlord to preserve housing stability. But the evidence is clear that the landlords have seen an increase in profits while tenants have been facing increasing rents that could force them out of their homes. The landlords have presented their reasons for a measured increase. The landlords take risks and receive rewards. If the landlords benefit when interest rates go down and their property is valued higher, when the interest rates go up, they want to shift those costs, the risks, to the tenant. That's why I'm in favor of a rent freeze.
Thank you, Carol. Michael, do you have?
May I ask Carol a question?
Surely.
I didn't understand your last sentence. Did you say that you're in favor of rent increase?
No,
I thought I heard-
freeze, freeze, freeze,
Ah,
freeze, freeze.
okay,
As
that's
in
what I-
frozen, freezing, cold, freeze, zero.
All right, thank you. It's hard to hear in here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, everybody. So we've heard from dozens of tenants throughout this process, and we have heard from 5 landlords. This is now the second year in a row that landlords have not followed the law. They have not provided tenants riders informing them of their rights. They have not provided HCR the data required to allow us and HCR to do their jobs. Instead, they seek to circumvent a public process by using the rent that we pay them to hire attorneys to try and stop this board from providing action and minor tenant protections. Meanwhile, as Carol said, they neglect basic maintenance in our homes. Sorry, I skipped this part. The data that we do have provided by landlords points to increased revenue, while we have heard from dozens of tenants that have stated that their costs have gone up. Insurance, groceries, childcare have all increased dramatically, leaving our neighbors further cost burden and unable to build savings, wealth, and peace of mind. And I'm particularly struck by Don, who spoke at the hearing, who talked again how he didn't get a cost of living adjustment from his Social Security. There are some 6-figure tenants who I think also don't deserve to pay $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. But a lot of the tenants that we've heard from are seniors on fixed incomes who cannot afford even a 4% rental increase. As HCR navigates these lawsuits and works to provide the negative 15% rental adjustment to eligible tenants, the most reasonable course of action that our board can take is a 0% rental adjustment for 1- and 2-year leases. And just further, some of those large buildings are outside the special district. I was just looking at the zoning map. So to even break that down, which in addition would provide further confusion to this process and further muddy the miasma that we're all navigating through, this is a simple solution that will allow them to get more data. So next year, when they have to comply with the July 31st deadline, when we will see more data, we can have the potential to make a different decision. So just again, 0% for 1- and 2-year leases. Thank you.
If there aren't other questions for Michael and Carol, I think we can move to hearing motions and discussing them. Michael.
I make the motion that the Rent Guidelines Board adopt a 0% rental adjustment for 1- and 2-year leases for the year 2024.
I second that.
Any discussion? Arlene.
I find being on this board very difficult, knowing that these regulations are arbitrary, only affect a small percentage of rental units. Also, that I realize that not all property owners are Stony Run, and not all property owners are like that awful person who said at a meeting last year that the heartbreaking stories presented by the tenants make him want to puke. I am also moved by property owners faced with rising costs. As for vilifying property owners for making a profit, I must point out that almost all of us make a profit. Almost all of us trade our efforts for dollars. However, after careful consideration, gut-wrenching consideration, and for the sake of pragmatism, I will vote for a 0% increase in rent. I come to this decision because of the numbers presented to this board. That's all we have to work with. And because of the stories of property owners acting in bad faith.
Thank you, Arlene. Other folks have things to say?
Yeah. There's something about the tying guidelines to actors that act in bad faith, which definitely is happening, by the way. That seems punitive and vindictive, and DHCR has this legislation, the state has rules and regulations to deal with the bad actors and the people and the individuals who act in bad faith. And yeah, they're very, very slow. They have done almost nothing because of the litigation. But I think that we need to let DHCR's process and the state's process work. And we can advocate outside of this board to maybe make it better. I know there's been discussion of what people want, and I hope that happens. Our local state assembly person testified here in front of this board. Just got the primary nomination, and I hope goes to Albany and does something to help DHCR work better. But being punitive because of some bad actors I don't think is helpful to the process or to the community at large.
Junior, sorry, I'm going to take my prerogative as chair to call on myself. Junior, I agree with you. I think that it would be inappropriate for this board to punish owners in general for the behavior of a few owners. And I don't want to do that. I don't think we should do that. To me, the data in front of this board is crystal clear. We see that the lawful adjustment that this board decided on for the 2022 to 2023 year isn't reflected in people's rents. So we don't have a picture of what the rental market looks like once that enforcement has happened. The income and expense reports from owners, which is the only data that we can rely on for what it costs to run a building, right? I'm sensitive, Tara and Junior, to increasing costs. I'm sensitive to the owners who have testified that they can't repair a unit and so can't rent it and so are losing that income. I'm sensitive to that. And the only tangible data that we have to rely on are the income and expense reports from DHCR that summarize the surveys that owners respond to or choose not to respond to. And that is the data that we have, right? And that data shows increasing net operating income over the last couple of years in in large buildings in our district, in small buildings in our district. It shows that buildings in our district taken together uh, have higher net operating income margins than rent regulated buildings elsewhere, and shows that costs overall, right, increased 2 years ago and decreased last year. So I empathize, and I cannot make a decision based on data that we don't have in front of us. And so to me, the combination of distinctively healthy margins here in Kingston, right? Healthier margins in Kingston than in other areas where we have information about the the um, the operating income for owners of rent regulated buildings. Cooling inflation show no reason why I think that the data can point to choosing a positive adjustment. So I yeah, so I have to say that I'm with you, Arlene, in saying that I would support that. Lee.
Thank you. I'm a third generation landlord, I must confess. And my parents and my grandparents cared deeply about their buildings and the people who lived in them. I also care deeply about all the buildings in Kingston and the people who live in them. It's very clear from the objective data that we have that we need to freeze the rents. That's it. The data is crystal clear. The lack of data that we suffer from is a result of noncompliance from property owners. If not noncompliance, then a lack of transparency and willingness to participate in the process that could only benefit them if these assumptions that we must make are indeed true. Based on the data, I really think it's crystal clear that landlords have made a greater proportion of income into cost in 2023 versus 2021. That costs are rising at a lower rate than income over the same period of time for landlords of ETPA eligible units. The testimony provided to us has been crystal clear and overwhelmingly demands that we take a stand. This is not a punitive measure. It is objective based on the data that we have available. Some tenants have seen illegal rent increases. There appears to be a mass non-compliance with the ETPA. And it's important that we respect the needs of both tenants and landlords in order to have housing stability. We need that. As we protect and respect the needs of landlords, we need evidence that's clear. And the evidence is very clear. Landlords have seen an increase in profits based on the data that they themselves have provided to us. Many landlords seem to have been non-compliant with the law and the decisions of RGB, of our guidelines board. They have claimed that the process of maintaining the regulations, filing the paperwork is too complex, yet many feel that they can file complex lawsuits. That seems easy, I guess, in comparison to basic regulations that all small business owners are required to provide. I am also calling on our board to insist that the DHCR enforce the ETPA in Kingston and provide leases with the ETPA rider. We need massive outreach and education to both landlords and tenants about the laws and procedures that we're operating under. I really hope that our board and the DHCR can work together to figure out the best ways to do this outreach and education so that all of us have this information and are informed for maximum transparency. Again, the data is very clear, a 0% increase.
Thank you, Lee. Other comments? Hearing none, I'm gonna call the question. And I will call roll. Mie. Sorry, let me restate the, yes, please. Thank you, Michael.
So the motion was to have the Rent Guidelines Board set the guideline for the year 2024 for 1 and 2 year leases at 0%.
For 1 and 2 year leases.
For 1 and 2 year leases, yes.
Mie,
Aye.
Junior,
No.
Tara,
No.
Michael,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
and Noah, aye. The motion carries, and that is our guideline for the 2024 to 2025 year. Is that the right? Did I say that right? All right, thank you. I want to quickly do one other piece of business, which is we need to file an explanatory statement for both this decision and for the 2022 to 2023 guideline. April, can we set a date to do that while we have everybody in their calendars here? Do we want to schedule that now or let's pick a date in September that's not a holiday. How about the 17th? Tuesday the 17th. Michael has a full dance card. Do you want to propose another day that could work? September 16th or 19th work for me, assuming we're doing 6 p.m. at City Hall. Other?
They work for me.
I don't know. No, I don't have my calendar with me. I don't know.
Let's do the 16th, September 16th at 6 p.m. City Hall, pending complaints from members. If that doesn't work, send me a note and we will reschedule. Before we adjourn, I want to quickly make a couple of thank you notes. I so appreciate DHCR staff and leadership who have made this process work. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for coming up to Kingston, for collecting the data, for tabulating the data, for keeping us on the right side of the law. I really appreciate it. I also want to recognize our colleagues at the City of Kingston and the Kingston Library for hosting our meetings, especially Bartek, who Bartek, we love you. Thank you, Bartek, especially. I also want to thank the stenographers and court reporters who keep us honest and ensure that our meetings and hearings produce accurate records. And I also want to thank all of you. Thank you to my colleagues on this board for taking this work really seriously and for showing up ready to do hard work together. And last, but not least at all, I want to recognize the people of Kingston who have come out to share stories, to be vulnerable, to tell us about their lives and about their experiences with rent regulation. We could not do our job without the full participation of our community, and we have gotten that, and I think we should be very appreciative. Thank you to landlords who have come out, to tenants who have come out, and to other people who have come out to help us really understand what is going on in this community. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Carol moves.
I'll second.
Junior seconds. Noah, I'm going to say aye. Mia?
Aye.
Junior? Tara?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Arlene?
Yes,
Lee?
Aye.
The motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. It is 7:26 p.m.
Thank you, everyone.